joined by a really great panel today for this session on shifting towards sustainable and healthy diets. Very pleased to welcome Betty Kibaara, Director of the Food Initiative at the Rockefeller Foundation, Brent Loken, Global Food Lead Scientist at WWF, Luz Maria de Regil, Director, Nutrition and Food Safety at the World Health Organization, Philip Wagnitz, Director for Quality and Sustainability at Lidl International, and Petra van der Aar, representing Consumentenbond, the Dutch consumer organization and a member of Consumers International. Welcome, everyone, and thanks very much for joining. So as mentioned, the theme of the summit this week is a just transition to sustainable lifestyles, thinking about, as we all know, the need to include sustainable consumption as a major part of the transition towards a greener economy, but also ensuring that this is achieved in a way that is accessible for consumers, not asking consumers as individuals to make changes, but recognizing the need for systemic change to the incentives and structures that shape our consumption patterns and our lives to make sustainable choices easier. Also, an important element of this just transition to sustainable lifestyles is making sure that consumer rights and needs are met at the same time. There's no point moving towards sustainability if, in the case of food, people still don't have access to adequate, nutritious, safe food. So we'll be thinking as well about some of the interconnections between sustainability and health in particular. We know that this is, obviously a conversation that attracts a lot of interest, often one of the more contested elements of sustainable lifestyles. The shift towards plant-rich diets, for example, is identified by the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change as the single most influential demand-side action we can take as consumers for mitigating greenhouse gas emissions. This doesn't mean, obviously, that we need to kind of move over wholesale, that people need to abandon cultural practices, that consumers need to move ahead of structures like affordability, availability, accessibility, but it's clear we can't hide from the reality that this shift is needed, not just for sustainability reasons, but for our health as well. We know that some 68% of consumers worldwide are interested in eating more plant-based food, again, for reasons of health as well as sustainability, but only 20% regularly do so. So clearly there's a gap, not just in intention and action, but in terms of how available these options are to consumers, and making sure this is genuinely accessible. We're going to hear from each of our panelists a couple of times, 2 short interventions each. So please do keep to time, everybody. A reminder also to speak slowly and clearly so that our interpreters can translate for the audience. I think first we're going to hear from the consumer voice on our panel. I mean, we're all consumers, obviously, but from consumer advocacy, Petra. Could you share what you're hearing from consumers in the Netherlands in particular about the shift to sustainable diets? Is there much opposition to the idea of eating more plant-based foods? Over to you, Petra.
Yeah, thank you for giving me the opportunity to talk about this important topic. We have conducted several qualitative studies to understand how these consumers feel about adopting a more sustainable diet. The results are clear. People have a deep awareness that they cannot continue the lifestyle they have. People recognize that real change is needed, they want to contribute, and they are willing to adjust their behavior. Contrary to the belief, there is a little opposition to eating more plant-based foods. Many are surprised to learn that even small steps can have a significant impact. The 50-50 target and the realization that the shifts alone can make a big difference helps people to adapt a new mindset. They don't have to give up meat entirely. Just eating less meat a few days a week already makes a meaningful impact. Consumers stated in our latest study, if we all reduce our meat consumption a little, it won't feel like meat eaters and vegetarians are on opposite sides anymore. Instead, we can work together towards a more sustainable food system. However, many consumers feel a disconnect. On the one hand, they experience a significant pressure to change their habits, and on the other, they see a little transformation in larger systems. This fuels an undercurrent of distrust towards the government and the corporate world. For consumers, sustainability and health are deeply connected. While meat substitutes are generally healthier than meat, many meat and fish alternatives still fail to meet consumers' expectation for a truly healthy option. These products are often highly processed, often overly salty and lacking in protein. Of the 75 plant-based burgers we analyzed in 2023, only 4 were both fully plant-based and nutritionally adequate. consumers don't want just a sustainable diet, but they want one that is truly good for them. That's my answer to your question.
Perfect. Thanks so much, Petra. No, really, really comprehensive. I really appreciate it. Great to hear directly from obviously an organization that works so closely with consumers. Maybe we know that not everywhere will be the same, that attitudes vary quite a lot by country, but really encouraging to hear your experiences there. Moving across to a business perspective on this challenge, Philip, representing Lidl, what does Lidl see as the key barriers to consumers eating more sustainable diets? And is affordability the most important factor, or are there other things that we need to be considering? Over to you, Philip.
Yeah, thanks for having me at this very important issue. For us as a company, definitely very important. I think price is not the only reason. I think we have like various barriers that we have to overcome. One is habit. I think everybody who's listening and who is here knows that habit plays a big part. And before you do a habitual change, you need to know what you need to change. So you need to have the know-how, which is also not always there, depending on where you look. We also have the problem of taste, a barrier that Petra was just alluding to, that, for example, if you have a plant-based alternative, it doesn't always taste like the original, even though it's a bridging technology, let's say. It doesn't go 100% there yet. And the quality is important for the health. Even though it's healthier, sometimes it's highly processed if you look at plant-based protein. Then the price and the promotion is also very important. And so I just wanted to make sure, and I come to price in a sec, but price is one issue of many, but it's an important issue. For us, it's really important that we follow the science. And I think the science hasn't been there yet so evidently in the past, even though we all knew who were like in this bubble. Now I think it's very clear, at least in the corporate world, that the planetary health diet, which was published a few years ago, is kind of the North Star, and we use it as the North Star. And it really gives us a great framework where we can cover health and sustainability in one. And if we have that North Star 2050, so that's like our net zero 2050, nature positive 2050, if we have the planetary health date 2050 as a guiding star at Lidl, we also have formulated clear goals. And I think that's really important in this discussion now, that if you have one scientific principle and a guiding goal, for us it is that by 2030, like a target to reach towards the planetary health diet, we want to increase plant-based food sales by 20% until 2030 on our road towards the planetary health diet. And with that common goal, we want to increase the sales of fruits, of vegetables, of whole grains, of plant-based proteins. They fall into this category of plant-based food according to the planetary health diet. And I mentioned also whole grains. Yeah, so that's really important. We eat a lot of grains in Europe, but whole grains really important. And so therefore, we were the first retailers to put out those targets in all 30 countries. So that doesn't only apply to Germany. I'm now from Lidl International, but really to all countries in Europe. And I think this is really important, that we have one common framework, and I come to the framework later. But in terms of barriers, I think it's really important that we cover these different aspects, but always with a scientific goal in mind. And what we can do then is to give our customer an offer that he or she can take in order to go towards that planetary health diet lifestyle in a way. And we already sell around 1,000 vegan products in our stores. And now we have just in January, also published in all countries that we want to increase whole grain. And really, that's a different kind of beast because you want to offer an alternative on whole grain, but you also want to increase the whole grain content of all the different products. For example, a pizza margarita normally doesn't have so much whole grain in it, but increasing it step by step, like from year to year, can yield a lot of benefit. Also, it doesn't affect the taste so much. So there are possibilities we can take. And the taste is, I think, next to the offer, a very important issue where we can, as a retailer, work on. There's a big shift, as Petra was mentioning, going on towards cleaner, less processed alternatives. For example, we just launched a mycoprotein schnitzel, which is basically a schnitzel based on mushroom protein. And then if we look into cultivated meat, which is around the corner, there's a lot of innovation happening on this bridging technology that is maybe also tasting better to get these products cleaner, less processed. That's the name of the game right now, and will continue for the next 10 years. But we already have a good taste, I guess, but it's definitely not where it could be. And then lastly, the price, I think is really important in order to have parity on the plate. We introduced last year, maybe you have seen that, we have introduced in Germany and 6 other countries, and many other countries are following now because we don't prescribe that, but we make an offer. We have introduced the price parity. And price parity means that all the vegan alternatives for meat cost the same, at least the same, like the meat in stock. And surprisingly, the uptake, so the sales went up by 30% for those vegan alternatives. But again, we do this permanently. But again, it's not only the vegan alternatives we're talking about. We're talking about fruits, vegetables. We talk about pulses, nuts, seeds. We talk about whole grain, and we talk about vegan alternatives, plant-based protein alternatives. So it's not only that; it's really an array of things, and I think that's really important to cover.
Thanks so much, Philip. Great to hear your perspective on some of those competing challenges. I can see we've got some answers coming through on the poll. We'll bring that up in a little bit. So yeah, to hear the audience's thoughts as well. I know it's often the answer is it's a combination of everything, but interesting to help think through what some of those competing challenges are. Moving on to our next panelist, I think it's interesting that both the comments we've heard so far, although focused primarily on Europe, have thought about this link to health, that this kind of arbitrary divide between sustainability and health when it comes to diets doesn't necessarily need to be upheld. When we start thinking more globally in particular, it becomes super important. It makes no sense to be talking too much about sustainable diets when we're in contexts where people can't afford access to healthy food. But even in all contexts, there is this link. Luz, it would be great to hear, when talking about dietary transition and balancing these priorities on health and sustainability, do you, at the World Health Organization, see these goals as being interconnected? Or are there any trade-offs we should be aware of when thinking through action on dietary shift?
Well, I think that the initial answer is yes. Everything is interconnected. I think that we shouldn't lose sight of the physical, economic, political, and sociocultural factors that influence how consumers make the dietary choices. The previous panelists talk about price, talk about whether the products are available in the market, what's the food offer that is there. So for most of the people, price and availability are critical factor in the way we choose foods. About 1 in 3 people globally cannot afford a healthy diet. So we need to think about solutions that transform the healthiness and also that they are sustainable if we want to achieve health and climate goals and bring them together. So far, we believe that a lot of the conversation in terms of food security and ensuring that actually people have something to eat has been focused on the amount, but not necessarily in the type of food, on the nutritional part of food. So we need to ensure that countries, and particularly low and middle income countries, have foods that can contribute to healthy diets, and those foods need to be available. So we don't have to travel to a big distance and affordable. But also we need to be conscious that in addition to the availability and affordability, we also have choices. We make choices when we select foods. And when you were saying that the purpose of this summit is unlocking dietary shifts. And we need to assess the cost of transitioning to healthier diets, but also, I mean, again, the cost of the impact of our choices. And I go to this because the truth is that this transition has brought more food, but also there is a high, most of the markets are inundated of foods that are high in unhealthy fats, sugar, and sodium. And the burden of diet-related non-communicable diseases is increasing dramatically. Among most of our member states, the rates of obesity and diet-related and non-communicable diseases is a priority. And probably you have heard a lot of the debate. We know around it. We know that these foods, sometimes called ultra-processed, are we hear more and more, and it's because we are getting conscious about it, and also because more people are getting sick. Just to give you a statistic, 2 million people, 2 million deaths were attributable to sodium intake, to high sodium intake in 2021. And almost 300,000 deaths each year can be attributed to trans fatty acids. So the supply of food is unhealthy, and again, it's highly available. But I wanted also to make one point. In terms of the climate change, it's not only the type of food, it's also the packaging. Several packaged foods are contributing to the climate change conversation. And we need to find better food options, but also better packaging for those. And I don't want to shy away from the conversation of whether we need to transition from animal plant-based to from animal foods to a plant-based. Clearly, plant-based solutions or diets have shown a benefit on health. But the current available options, unless we go to the more traditional patterns, that those are the ones that have been studied, the effects may not be realized. And if we don't inform consumers that not all the options that are available in the markets are actually healthier, we are not meeting the purpose. And we are not meeting the purpose in terms of ultra processing or processing, in terms of environmental outcomes, and also in terms of health. So in this conversation, we need to be very clear that it's not a transition from animal to plants. It's probably a combination, that the type of food matters, but also the processing and the way that it's consumed matters. And the last piece is, I want to talk about innovation. Our previous speaker talked about lab-produced meat. That has implications, and I mean, it's an early development. Innovations are coming that possibly maybe sustainable or more sustainable, but we're in a very, very early stage to understand what is the real impact in nutrition, in acceptability, and also in the environment. So yes, the outcomes and the goals are need to be aligned, not only are compatible, but need to be aligned, because again, in the health of people and planet is one almost, and we need to think about it. Over to you.
Thanks, Liz. Yeah, a really important point. Definitely really valuable to add there. I think our next panelist can add a little bit to what you were just discussing about that point on availability, and really ensuring that these kind of essential options, not just thinking about the protein transition, but thinking about sustainable diets and healthy, sustainable diets as kind of rooted in fruits, vegetables, fresh foods as well. Betty, would you be able to share a little bit on how the Rockefeller Foundation's work on procurement and good food purchasing in Africa has been able to align action for nutrition and for sustainability, as Liz mentioned?
All right, thanks so much, Shelley. And before I just respond to your question, I want to say that I will focus on school feeding, the school feeding program, especially for children who are also consumers, and sometimes not, sometimes they can be ignored. And I want to say that I'm a beneficiary of a school feeding program in Kenya. It was a milk program that was done in earlier days, and it enabled actually the Kenya to become one of the best countries when it comes to dairy production. And right now it's valued at about $2 billion. So you can imagine if we're able to bring other value chains, for example, the millet and the sorghum value chain, into the production system, it can really be very, very transformative. So the Rockefeller Foundation, we are deeply committed to saving lives and the planet. And we know that school meals are not just a lifeline for the millions of children worldwide, but it's also contributing to improving the human capital and then drive economic growth. It also provides markets for the many farmers who we serve. And globally, there are 418 million learners. Studies have been done that shows that an investment of $1 in school feeding programs brings back about $9 in economic return. And there's also opportunity for job creation. 100,000 learners, for 100,000 learners, if you were to feed them, then you create about 1,400 jobs. And then there has been a lot of development, the school meals becoming very transformative, and that's why the Rockefeller Foundation joined the Global School Meals Coalition, which is a coalition of diverse partners who are trying to reimagine the future of school feeding programs. So the Rockefeller Foundation, we work at different levels. I will not go into too much details, but we have supported governments to design and roll out programs for school feeding. But I think one thing we have done that is I've had resonated with the other speakers is around menu engineering and menu diversity. A lot of school feeding programs rely on maize and beans and rice and beans, but we can improve the nutrition quality of those meals. And that's why one of the things that the Rockefeller Foundation has done, and I know, Philip, you mentioned this, is around the whole grain. So the Rockefeller Foundation, we set up the Fortified Whole Grain Alliance, which has really been supporting transition to fortified whole grain. And we know whole grain are important because they are 5 times more nutritious. They also reduce the waste because when you're over processing the flour, you're losing the bran and the germ. But when you do whole grain, it's like you're bringing back the wasted food into the system. So over 1 million learners in the last, I would say maybe 2-3 years are now consuming fortified whole grain in Kenya, in Burundi, and in Rwanda. And actually last year, Rwanda actually committed, they have the intention to expand the fortified whole grain to 4 million learners. We've also worked in other value chains, the bean value chain, the high iron beans, more than almost 500,000 learners in Malawi and Kenya and Tanzania are now consuming the biofortified beans. We have also made a lot of progress in trying to shift schools to consume the millet and sorghum. And the most recent pilot we have done in Kenya is where we piloted and prototyped sorghum and beans for school meals, and the kids love it. And I think what we also liked about it is that the overall cost of, if you compare rice and bean meal and sorghum and beans, is actually the sorghum and beans was 20% lower in terms of pricing. So we are trying a number of innovation. And in addition to that, the foundation has also set up what we call the Good Food Innovation Fund. The Good Food Innovation Fund is a pocket of funds where SMEs can tap into and get, whether these are grants or TA or returnable grants, between 50,000 and 200,000 to be able to do some innovative products. For example, I can highlight maybe 2 companies. One which
30 seconds, please, Betty, to wrap up. Thanks very much.
One that is doing the pre-cooked beans. Another one is doing pre-cooked maize flour for school feeding programs. So in a nutshell, we have been in the space of working on the menu engineering for school feeding programs. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Betty. Looking forward to hearing more about that later on. Just to wrap up the first round of our panel, I think we're going to move to Brent Loken from WWF. We've been hearing Brent from a lot of different perspectives here, different countries, different contexts. We know that dietary shifts doesn't mean the same thing in every country. That's part of what this just transition means. WWF has done a lot of work looking at some of these differences. Could you very quickly, I know it's a big question, explain how dietary shift might vary for different communities?
Thanks, Charlie. And it has been fascinating to hear from the different perspectives. I mean, starting out with the more European-based perspective of a lot of awareness towards diets, towards the African perspective where it's about feeding kids in schools. And one of the things that I think that we've done a really good job on over the past several years is establishing the need for dietary shifts at the international level, at the climate COPs, the biodiversity COPs, the land use COPs. I think we've put food onto the table and it is being discussed. Although of all the main actions, dietary shifts is still the one action that receives a less attention. People are still a bit afraid to talk about it, but it is being discussed. with the Eat Lancet and other reports, you know, I think we've done a pretty good job scientifically establishing the fact that we need this shift, you know. However, one of the criticisms that we did get from the Eat Lancet was the fact that it felt like it wasn't regionally or nationally sensitive to different diets and like different contexts. That is being corrected with, you know, Eat Lancet 2.0. But, you know, that focus at the international level for the need for like dietary shifts is fantastic. However, what I think we've done much less of a job at is really understanding how dietary shifts plays out in different countries. And here, what we're trying to put together, that puzzle, that international puzzle of what these dietary shifts looks like, is we've spent the last couple of years going around the world, talking to people from all over the world, experts, looking at the scientific literature, really trying to understand what is dietary shifts, what is sustainable production, what does, you know, food loss and waste look like in different contexts, and what actions would have like the greatest impact in these various areas. So we've spent the past years looking at it, and it's quite fascinating. You know, I mean, when we're talking about dietary shifts, I mean, it's only a small subset of the world that is really focusing on dietary shifts. I would say Europe is really a leader in this in terms of really, you know, wanting to talk about this. Petra highlighted the fact that within, you know, consumers within one of the countries, and I think the Netherlands is probably really leading the way here, consumers are really aware of the fact that they have to shift their diets. In other parts of the world, it's very different. They're not ready to necessarily talk about reducing meat consumption or dietary shifts, or they equate dietary shifts with having to give up meat. So, you know, one of the things that we have to do moving forward is really have a much more nuanced conversation about this, be very sensitive to the local context, look at the local culture, traditions, and histories with food, you know, take that into context, think about the actions that will have the most impact, and then find those actions that will work in like different places. One of the things that we did find from our research, which we found to be quite interesting, is a shift towards healthy diets, is that a shift towards more alternative proteins. And I'm not talking about legumes and nuts and, you know, plant-based proteins. I'm talking about alternative or lab-based meats. Was one of the lowest impact actions that we found. In a lot of countries, people just did not want to deal with it. They did not see that as a action that would have the highest impact, right? So where I think the leverage will actually lie here is it's that shift towards more traditional foods, more local foods, more plant-based foods. It's the nuts, it's the legumes, it's, you know, things like that. So, you know, I think there is some good wins here. I mean, you know, it's fantastic that we are actually talking about it. I am a bit concerned though with the current climate, that are some of the advances that we've made in recent years could actually, we could lose them. So thanks.
Thanks, Brent. Yeah, no, a really important perspective. And the next part of the discussion, we're going to dive a bit more into, what can we do in practice to not only prevent any rollback, but keep moving forward on this. We're just going to share quickly, if team's okay, our screen, sharing the results of that poll that we put up via Slido. So let me see when that's available to share. And again, I know that this is I get a bit of a reductive framing, but just helpful to think through some of the questions that we got through from the panel, and I think aligns pretty effectively actually this point on availability as maybe an underestimated factor there, but just having, especially when it comes to these fruits, vegetables, legumes, whole grains, we know that we're not producing enough in many cases, that they're we're producing enough calories to feed the world, but not the right nutrients, and a shift towards the right nutrients would also deliver strong sustainability benefits. Social and cultural preference, very high as well, and that's an interesting outcome. Again, we know that social is not kind of set in stone, but is shaped a lot by what's available, what is affordable, and there is room to move there, but helpful to remember that there are some more complex, more nuanced factors in play that make things difficult. But then obviously affordability, information as well, especially misinformation, I think, on the shift towards sustainable diets is increasingly becoming an issue. So all very much on the radar. We're going to keep this open. We're going to close this poll for now, but for the next half of the session, please keep using the Slido to share any solutions or any comments on the discussion. And we'll be factoring these all into some of our post-summit reflections. So looking forward to seeing more comments from the audience. But for now, I think we can bring the slides down and move back to our next round of discussion, which, as I mentioned, we're hoping to focus a little more on, some of these practical solutions. So we're going to mix up the order a little bit and go back to Liz to get us started. Liz, policy action on healthy diets, we know often a lot more advanced than on sustainable diets. And so we've heard throughout the panel as we're a few years ahead in having that conversation. What lessons would you say we can learn about the most effective shifts, most effective interventions for shifting consumer behavior from policy on healthy diets? Over to you.
Thank you. I think that one of that is what it has been already covered a lot in a lot of the sessions, evidence. Making sure that there is evidence behind the shift is important. And then we have to simplify the way that we are communicating the evidence. So we need to do two things: simplification of the messages to make sure that everyone understands what we are talking about. Sustainable diets may not be necessarily more expensive. We just believe that they are more expensive. They are not necessarily healthy or unavailable. They are almost everywhere. But we haven't been able to simplify the message. And as Brent was saying, we have not been able to also make sure that we understand very clearly the context. So the message is context specific. If we think about the principles of a healthy diet needs to be balanced, moderate, diverse, and adequate. And if we follow those principles, almost everything can be contextualized. Those principles are not that clear for sustainability. We need to put them together. What it means, sustainability, how we communicate it, how we simplify the message, and what is the message for the different audiences. Here we are talking about consumers, so consumers need to have more clarity about what it means. I at heart believe that no one really wants to consciously, as most of the people, no one wants to consciously make a damage to the environment, but we don't know that the options that we are making may harm the environment. So in terms of the lessons learned is making sure that there is evidence behind, that the messages are clear, that they are consistent, and that we integrate policies. One of the pieces is what WHO is doing is, in our policies, we are also now bringing the sustainability lens. So for example, when we are talking about healthier food procurement in schools or in governments or even private sector companies, we are not talking only about the nutritional criteria, but trying to bring the sustainability angle. And when we are talking about, again, procurement, is about also including the conversation waste and how is it managed, the context, how food is managed overall. So I think that the integration of policies is important, and the way we communicate it. WHO particularly, of course, talks to a lot of regulators. And I think that the message also needs to be very clear in terms of what needs to be, what are the regulators need to understand, what are the important shifts in the transition, how we can give them the tools in an easier way so they can, the government officials can actually help us make the shifts, because it's not only the consumers may demand more food if they have sustainable food and healthier food if they have the knowledge, but also it needs to be an approach that is a systemic approach. Regulators and producers need to understand the relevance of bringing those pieces together. The wins in the area that we are seeing in health is because the messages have been simplified, packaged, but also consistently delivered, so everyone can understand. And still, I mean, I think that we are far from winning the battle. I mean, we are just at the beginning of making sure that the food system and the food environments are healthier.
Absolutely. Thanks so much, Liz. And yeah, definitely lots of challenges facing us all at once, but really important to align action on those. Another area in which we're seeing some momentum, again with work to go, is on local food systems. Governments increasingly recognizing the value of this on a production side in particular, but I think it would be interesting to think through what this means in terms of diets as well. Betty, how important are our local food systems for enabling healthy and sustainable diets, and what are the key actions that can strengthen local diets within these food systems?
Yeah, local sourcing, I will say, supports more inclusive food systems. And when you even think about gender-sensitive development, in which a lot of the legumes are actually produced by women. And again, back to the school feeding programs, school meals can be a very powerful demand driver for sustainably grown food, if and when we can be able to influence school meals procurement decisions. And just to highlight one example where, for example, Brazil has influenced procurement standards, and in which 30% of the school feeding program meals need to actually be sourced locally from the farm families. And we're seeing many other countries, replicating similar models. For example, Kenya is we're in the process of prototyping the aggregator model, where the schools are going to be sourcing directly from communities. In Nigeria and Ghana, they have the caterer model, where the farmers, they produce food knowing that they're going to be selling to, produce food knowing that they're going to be selling to the schools. And another good example is Benin. Just about 3 years ago, the school feeding programs were actually sourcing almost 100% of their production, their requirement from, they were actually importing. But right now, in the last couple of, maybe just a year ago, they're almost sourcing 80% from local farmers. And it's also interesting that they are also tweaking, so that they are tweaking the products, so that instead of doing the very highly refined rice, they are going for parboiled and they are going for parboiled and polished rice, which is more nutritious. So I think these are all very important, but there need to also be change in the mindset of the children. You can imagine transitioning the learners from consuming the white rice to the parboiled and polished rice requires a lot of SSB, social behavior change campaigns, and then also, decisions by government in terms of procurement standards. They need to go hand in hand. Yeah, thank you.
Perfect. Thanks very much, Betty. Moving from national solutions to something happening, I guess still national, but tying us into what you mentioned, Brent, about previously on the role of international action, and in some of these key forums. We've seen a lot of focus lately on the role of nationally determined contributions towards the Paris Agreement. So we see these slowly trickling through this year, and whether they're including food systems at all, let alone diets. How would you like to see sustainable diets being addressed more effectively through environmental policies like NDCs and equivalents of biodiversity and other areas?
Yeah, so in my first comment, I mentioned the fact that I think we've done a pretty good job putting that international puzzle together, really understanding and advocating for the fact that food systems had to be an international policy. Along with that, we've realized by looking at NDCs and NBSAPs that food systems were not addressed. They just really weren't in there. I mean, agriculture was really talked about, how food is produced, but especially when you're talking about dietary shifts, it was absent from almost every single NDC. And NBSAPs were a bit behind where NDCs were. So one of the things that we've been working on for the past several years is working at both at the international level and also at with individual countries on incorporating food systems into their NDCs, because what gets measured also gets managed. And what is in NDCs also signals business, it signals government officials, it signals everybody working on food systems on the ground that this is important and this is something that we have to take seriously. So we've been hosting national dialogues. I think we've had them in 20 countries so far, where we've been working with governments on really looking at their NDCs and NBSAPs. We've got an online tool where they can start to understand how food systems could help them to achieve some of their climate goals and biodiversity goals. Having said all this, though, we can't stop here, because we've seen from current international negotiations that NDCs are woefully under ambitious. They're not nearly ambitious enough, right? Neither are NBSAPs. So we can't just incorporate food systems into these policies and think that that's what's actually going to happen. We have to start work on the ground and start working with the farmers on the ground who are actually producing the food. One of the things that we found from this work that we've been doing in different countries, solving that great food puzzle, is we've heard from so many people that in many countries there's actually pretty good policies, right? There's great food policies, environmental policies. Where the gap is they're just not being implemented, right? So we just, one of the things that we have to do is it's great that we're working on NDCs and NBSAPs, but we can't stop there. We really need a more effort, a lot more energy and a lot more money from each one of us to really stimulate that on the ground work.
Perfect. Thanks for that, Brent. We see a couple of comments coming through in the Slido as well in terms of solutions, seeing points on making plant-based default options in menus and in entire menus, working with the food service industry. A couple of interesting ideas that have come through so far. Please do keep adding to those. It would be great to see some more ideas. But certainly coming back to the role of business, and in particular, Philip, thinking about this interaction between business and other stakeholders. What would make it easier for businesses to lead into the shift to sustainable diets in the way that Lidl has done? Are there actions that governments or consumers can be taking to help accelerate this?
Yeah, so first I want to say that we do everything we can in order to offer that choice to the customer. I can only talk about Europe, and I see this as a very international panel, and I think that in different countries you have different situations. At least for us, we always, offered an affordable choice in every product we offer. So you can walk into a Lidl and buy yourself a planetary health diet every day without compromising on price, I'm very sure. Because it's very consistent of fruits and vegetables and all these kind of things. No? So I think it is already affordable depending on where you are on the planet. Probably there's differences, but at least I think I just wanted to make that point. It's not something that is unachievable. It's there. You can go into supermarket and buy it. And obviously we need to innovate further on healthy, tasty products that meet those challenges and transition this shift. And there I think we can really accelerate better if we work together. And now to your question, I really think right now in my little bubble, which is the food retail bubble, we are at a point where we actually have that goal, the planetary health diet. We have the tools to measure our baseline towards that goal via the WWF methodology, which WWF put out. We are very glad about that because it's actually something that can be done for all retailers. And we are now in the position that in all major food retailers can do this assessment and see where do we want to get, where are we now? And this is really important because it actually creates a level playing field, which is not coming from the EU, which is not coming from the UN and so on, because consumer dietary guidelines are mostly governed by the states and not by the EU or by the UN, even though there are WHO recommendations, but it still is very much a national issue. So as long as that doesn't change, I think we are at this point where we, at least in food retail, can make that choice. And national guidelines can make a big difference towards that. And I'm looking at you, Petra, actually, because we have that dilemma right now that we are starting to measure differently from country to country what is actually a plant-based protein and what not. If, for example, with the WWF methodology, we say a plant-based protein is pulses, nuts, seeds, and vegan alternatives. And in the Netherlands, bread, canned fruit and vegetables, and sweets are also somehow considered into that methodology. And I have to honestly say, a bread or a Snickers doesn't replace my sausage. Yeah. So in this respect, I think it's really important that we measure the same in all the countries, because then we can actually have a baseline where we can actually have that competition. If it's not being governed by the state, which I don't see in the near foreseeable future, we can, however, create that competition amongst the food retailers on an even ground and set those targets and work towards those targets. I think that is very important. And for example, in the Netherlands, bread is considered as a protein source. In Germany, bread is considered as a carbohydrate source, but due to national dietary guidelines. And this is really depending on each of the countries, where do you put it in the basket? And then we have that, we say in German, Flickenteppich, which is like patchwork throughout Europe, and then we lose comparability. So there, I think we can actually help each other out and create a common framework. And then I think what we can also do to accelerate that is shift these mindsets. We can offer those nice products, but there needs to be this shift in mindsets. We have heard this now throughout all these talks right now. And I think really that is one thing that we can be better at. Also as Lidl, we can promote more and more, and we already do. We started, for example, in in 2023, with children, we banned all advertising for unhealthy products regarding to WHO criteria. So we don't advertise since 2023 any unhealthy products to children, and we also eradicate all the children marketing on unhealthy products until end of this year. And then we also have been a freshness partner for the UEFA. I'm finished now already, Charlie. So for example, maybe you remember the soccer UEFA Champions Cup last year, where we actually played a different card. We didn't advertise for pizza and for energy drinks and for chips, but we actually advertised for fruits and vegetables. And at the beginning, everybody laughed at us, but now then, after the European Championships, they actually loved us. So people actually loved that different style of advertising. So we can say healthy diets can be fun. And we can move more into that direction to actually also educate and trigger the consumer on a positive note to trying out the healthy choice.
Perfect. Thank you, Philip. Interesting to hear a few points throughout the discussion on this kind of importance of getting measurement right, making sure we're looking in the right places and doing the right things to lay those foundations. Yeah, interesting to hear the other side of the conversation as well. So Petra, back to you. What would you like to see businesses doing to make sustainable diets more accessible for consumers?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Philip, also for pointing out some strange things in the Netherlands. But that's not what I wanted to talk about, because what we did was we saw that a lot of discussion about a sustainable diet were more about what are talked about the consumer than really with the consumers. So we conducted a citizen panel we organized it on behalf of the Ministry of Agriculture, Fishery, Food Security and Nature. And we asked 80 panelists what they think that is what would help, what are the solutions to make a more sustainable food choices as consumers. And they are from all around the Netherlands, for the west part, the east part, the northern part and the southern part. And in the fourth meeting, they choose the 3 best solutions, and what they choose themselves were the price mechanisms. Of course, everybody knows that they want to making plant-based products are more attractive through price regulations, and they see a special role for the government to eliminating fat for fruits and vegetables. But also, in addition, they proposed to withdraw subsidies for unsustainable food production. So this is not especially something they ask from the businesses, but more from the government. But what they ask from the business is clear and honest ingredient labeling. They really want to have better information on the packaging to increase consumers' awareness. According to the consumer panel, that needs to be clearer. No complicated or misleading names, and it needs to be more honest. No loopholes or bending the truth. Just say what's in it so everybody can understand. So that's a citation of one of the members. And the other thing is inspiration through tasting, promoting healthy plant-based products in supermarkets. Consumers struggle to break the habit of eating meat, even though they want to eat less meat. That's also other speakers already mentioned. And what they need is support, better meat alternative and inspiration for different ways to cook. As a panelist said, if you come across new, good and healthy products, you naturally start using them. So I really think that what Philip is also saying, that businesses can play an important role in introducing new and healthy foods.
Thanks very much, Petra, and thanks to all our panelists. We're going to come around one more time for a super quick, I'll ask for 30 seconds, and it's tough for a final thought on what's one thing that you, obviously there's no silver bullet, but one solution that you're most excited about, most on your mind in terms of enabling this access. A few things that have been coming through via the Slido from the audience, more focus again on supporting local producers and SMEs, making the connection towards plant-based food within the community. We've had a mention of Denmark's plant-based food action plan, promoting both production and consumption of legumes, fruits and vegetables. We've had a nuancing on Philip's point about having a common definition of plant-based protein, but remembering also that Obviously, every country has different needs, different food-based dietary guidelines required. Thinking about how to bridge those gaps without, making anything too crazy in terms of bread as a source of protein. But yes, let's go around quickly for one final round of comments. So just 30 seconds. What do you see as the most promising solution for making sustainable diets more available, accessible, affordable for consumers? And let's start with Brent for this one. That's okay, Brent.
Thanks, Charlie. Yeah, I mean, just to reemphasize what you just said is, it's a bit of a hard question because there is not a single promising solution, right? It's really depends. And I think one of the things that we have to be very careful of is being lured by the sexy, glamorous, solutions. And, in some cases, supporting smallholders and improving land tenure rights is the most promising solutions. It's other places working on plant-based foods, right? So we just really need to be very careful in terms of understanding the local context and really focusing on actions that will have the most impact. There are no panaceas, right? And if somebody tells you there are, then they are lying. One of the things that I'm most excited about at the moment is our work with retailers. I think the work that we're doing with Lidl and with others is extremely promising, has a potential to have huge global impact. And this work is happening all over the world. We've got, retailers in Asia that's working on this, in Europe, and also in Latin America. And I think if we can build this global movement of retailers that are really pushing towards creating an environment where plant-based foods are easy to get, affordable, accessible, that's really going to change the game.
Perfect. Thanks, Brent. Betty, over to you.
Yeah, so I agree there is no one silver bullet, but I'm very excited about what's happening in East Africa, the agroecology policies for different countries, including Kenya and Tanzania. But what I would say I am seeing like it's a promising solution is around financing for transitioning to regenerative food system. The Rockefeller Foundation, we have done an assessment that shows an annual gap of about 4.5 trillion, which is required to transition the global food systems to regenerative practices over the next decade. But we are very excited about 35 funders have come together to be part of this support to transitioning to regenerative agriculture. So I think that in one way really excites me and gives me a lot of hope. There's a lot of coordination among the funders in the space.
Amazing, really exciting, definitely. Philip, let's go to you next.
Yeah, so I think the most important thing the most inspiring and most the coolest thing for me is actually that if we can make it happen, we have this goal by 2030, we want to sell 20% more plant-based foods. How to make that happen? That our customers actually take that choice. That is for me the most important one right now. And I hope other retailers follow.
Absolutely, so do we. Petra, over to you.
Yeah, accessibility, availability, and affordability are not the main barriers in the Netherlands. I think that the real game changer is that we must stop luring consumers with cheap and unsustainable meat in excessive quantities. If it's available, they buy it. They say it in our panel studies, but they do know it isn't the right choice. So one Dutch consumer supermarket, and I agree with WWF that supermarkets are really can be the game changer in this in Europe. Has taken a bold step by no longer offering regular hamburgers. Instead, they only sell hamburgers blended with plant-based protein. And the result, consumer automatically buy less meat without even noticing. So this is the kind of change we need, I think. Systematic shifts that make sustainable choice the default and not the exception.
Agreed again. Thanks for that, Petra. And finally, Luz.
Well, first, thank you for this conversation. I think it has been great listening from everyone. I think that, again, everyone has a role to play here. From the WHO perspective, I'm very excited about the work that we are doing through the Alliance for Transformative formative action in climate change for health attached. We are starting to work more intentionally with member states to integrate this part of the food part through an approach of policy coherence between food policies for health and also for sustainability. So I'm very excited about that. The work is accelerating. We are collaborating also as part of our ICANN initiative, which is Initiative for Climate Action and Nutrition. That is a collaboration between FAO, GAIN, Scaling Up Nutrition, UNEP, where we are providing more rapid and intentional technical advice to governments. We think that we're optimistic that some of the governments can do the right thing.
Perfect. Thanks so much, Liz. And thanks to all of our panelists. Yeah, a really interesting discussion. I'll wrap it up quickly here. I'm sure we've all got meetings to go to next. But thanks also to our interpreters and to all of the attendees who've joined today and shared comments in the chat, or in the Slido rather. Yeah, I think a really effective conversation with these points made about availability, accessibility, affordability, recognizing different needs in different contexts, bringing the easy option to consumers, making this the default as a really important one, but also not underestimating the scale of the challenge that really came through throughout, and especially in those final comments that this is a big issue. It's only getting harder, but there are signs of progress. So really looking forward to continuing to work with all of the panelists and with all of those partners joining today. We've got a link in the chat to join our other sessions throughout the summit, starting with our focus on nature and biodiversity tomorrow. So I hope to see some of you there. But otherwise, thanks very much, everybody, and see you again soon.
Bye all.
Bye.